Welcome back to the deep dive, everybody. Today, we're going to be looking to something really interesting. I think.
Yeah.
I think it'll be interesting for everybody, even if you don't think so right off the bat.
Right.
It's all about this idea of product liability insurance.
Oh.
So we found this great document all about it, and I think we're going to have a really fascinating deep dive today.
Yeah, sounds good.
So product liability insurance. I mean, at first you might think, oh, this is about businesses.
Right.
If I'm not making products, I don't have to worry about this.
Yeah.
But
You'd be surprised.
yeah, I think
it's a lot more relevant to everyone than they think,
yeah, absolutely.
It's all around us, whether we realize it or not.
So what are we hoping to get out of this deep dive today?
Yeah.
Well, first and foremost, we need to just define what product liability even is.
Right.
And then we can kind of look at, the different ways it can impact businesses.
Yeah.
And then most importantly for our listeners, how can you use this information to be a smarter consumer?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
So what is product liability?
Well, the document we're looking at,
Right.
It says that product liability is basically any issues that come up relating to the manufacturing or the sale of products.
Okay, so that's pretty broad.
Yeah, it is.
What does
But
that?
what exactly does that mean?
Yeah.
So the document actually goes on to highlight three main types of product liability claims.
Okay.
The first one is manufacturing defects.
Okay.
The second one is design defects.
Gotcha.
And the third one is failure to provide adequate warnings or instructions.
Okay, so let's start with the first one.
Sure.
Manufacturing defects. Is that like a problem with?
You can think of it like something went wrong in the production process, like a one-off kind of thing.
Okay.
For example, let's say you're on a car assembly line.
Okay.
And there's a batch of screws that weren't tightened properly. That would be a manufacturing defect.
Gotcha.
Because it's not a problem with the design of the car itself.
Yeah.
It's just that specific batch of screws that weren't installed correctly.
And then how is that different from a design defect then?
A design defect is more like a fundamental flaw with the product's blueprint itself.
So like the design of the car itself is flawed.
Yeah, so no matter how perfectly you manufacture it,
Right.
if the design itself is flawed, it's still going to be a problem.
Can you give me like a real world example?
Yeah, so one really well-known example is the Ford Pinto case.
Okay. Yeah.
From back in the 70s.
Right. I remember that vaguely.
So the Ford Pinto had this issue where the fuel tank was prone to rupturing in rear-end collisions.
That's scary.
Yeah, and it turned out that this was because of a design flaw.
Okay.
So it wasn't just a few faulty cars. It was like a fundamental issue with the way the car was designed.
So like every single Ford Pinto had that problem.
Essentially, yeah. And that led to numerous accidents and lawsuits.
So that's like...
It's a really stark example of how a design defect can have really wide-reaching consequences.
Yeah, you would think with something like car design that they would have to go through a bunch of testing and quality control.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So how do companies even begin to like mitigate the risks of something like that?
Well, that's exactly where rigorous testing and quality control come in. It's absolutely essential.
So what kind of stuff are we talking about here?
I mean, it depends on the product, of course.
Sure.
But, you've got things like crash tests for vehicles, stress tests for appliances, even focus groups for like usability and potential hazards.
Oh, okay.
They'll bring people in and have them use the product and see if they can identify any potential issues.
Okay.
And then in addition to that, a lot of companies are investing in advanced like simulation and modeling software to try to predict potential issues before a product ever even hits the market.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it's really about being proactive rather than reactive.
Okay, but even with all that, obviously things can still go wrong.
Of course.
So what happens when things do go wrong?
Right.
What are the implications for businesses when they face these product liability claims?
Well, I mean, lawsuits can be really damaging to a company.
Yeah.
Not just financially, but also in terms of their reputation. So first of all, lawsuits can seek compensation for a whole range of damages.
Okay.
I mean, we're talking about things like medical bills, lost income from not being able to work, and even pain and suffering.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense.
But it's the punitive damages that can really hurt a company.
What are punitive damages?
So those are damages that are specifically meant to punish a company for being negligent or reckless.
Gotcha.
And those can be absolutely massive. We're talking millions or even billions of dollars in some cases.
Right.
And then beyond the financial hit,
Right.
there's also the reputational damage to consider.
Yeah, that's got to be hard to bounce back from.
Yeah, it's a huge deal.
Can you give me an example?
Well, I think a good example is the Johnson & Johnson talcum powder lawsuits.
Oh, yeah, I've heard about that.
So, you know, the science behind it is actually pretty complex and contested.
Right.
But the sheer volume of claims that were filed and the massive settlements that Johnson & Johnson had to pay out,
right,
it really eroded public trust in the brand.
Yeah, I can see that.
And I mean, it's still something that they're dealing with today.
That's wild.
It's hard to bounce back from something like that.
Yeah.
Once that trust is gone, it's gone.
So if you're a company, how do you protect yourself?
Right.
And protect your customers?
Yeah, it's a two-way street.
The source mentions this idea of limiting product liability.
Mm-hmm.
What does that actually look like in practice?
Well, a lot of it is what we've already talked about.
Okay.
Robust quality control, comprehensive testing, clear warning labels, but documentation is also really critical.
Okay.
Imagine a scenario where a company needs to issue a recall.
Yeah.
If they don't have detailed records, it's going to be a nightmare.
Yeah.
They need to be able to trace the source of the problem, identify which units are affected, and they need to be able to do it quickly and efficiently.
Yeah, absolutely.
So having detailed records of like every step of the process, down to like the component percentages used in each batch of product.
Wow.
That can be a lifesaver in a situation like that.
Yeah, and the source also mentions serial or batch numbers.
Right.
How does that help?
Well, think of those as like a fingerprint
Oh.
for every product.
Gotcha.
By assigning a unique identifier to each unit, companies can track exactly where each product went,
Wow.
who received it, and when. So if there's a recall, they can narrow down the scope and target only the affected products.
So it's about protecting consumers, but also about protecting the company.
Exactly.
From unnecessary fallout.
Right.
And that's where product liability insurance comes in.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little more about that?
Well, product liability insurance is basically a financial safety net for companies. It helps cover legal expenses if they get sued, settlements, and even the cost of issuing a recall.
Okay, so it protects them.
Right. It can be really valuable.
But it's not a free pass.
Right. It's not an excuse to be careless.
Right.
Companies still need to be proactive and minimize those risks as much as possible.
And there's one more thing I wanted to touch on from the source.
Sure.
It mentions having contracts reviewed by legal professionals.
Right.
Why is that so important?
Well, contracts are basically the backbone of any business transaction.
Yeah, that's true.
And when it comes to product liability, they can be really crucial.
Okay.
Because they outline the responsibilities and liabilities of everyone involved in the supply chain.
So like the manufacturer, the distributor, the retailer, they're all on the hook.
Right. So you need to make sure that the contracts clearly state who's responsible for what and what the potential consequences are if someone doesn't meet their obligations.
It's all about clarity.
Yeah, and having everything spelled out in writing.
Gotcha. That makes sense.
So there's no confusion down the line.
So I think after this deep dive, it's pretty clear that understanding product liability, it's not just important for businesses, it's important for everyone.
Definitely.
Even if you're just a consumer.
Exactly.
This is something that you should be aware of.
Yeah, for sure.
Because it affects all of us.
Absolutely.
So thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I think it was a good one.
I think so too.
And hopefully you learned something new.
I hope so.
And, you know, maybe it'll make you a little bit more aware of the products that you're buying and the companies that you're supporting. So until next time, happy diving.
Yeah. See you later.
Bye.
Bye.
All right, and that wraps up another deep dive. But before we go, I want to leave you with something to think about.
Okay.
We've been talking about product liability from a kind of legal and financial perspective.
Right.
But in a world where we're increasingly reliant on complex products, what are the ethical implications of product liability?
That's a great question.
I mean, what are the responsibilities of manufacturers to ensure the safety of their products?
Right.
And what about consumers? Do we have a responsibility to be informed?
Yeah.
To make responsible choices? And as a society, how do we balance innovation with the need to protect people from harm?
It's a tough one.
It's a really complex issue.
Yeah, definitely.
But it's one that we need to be thinking about.
Absolutely.
Because it's only going to become more important as technology continues to advance.
Right.
So that's something for you to chew on. Until next time.
Yeah.
See you later.
Bye.